Hi everyone, you're watching Book Bakht reviews. I'm Bakhtawar, and today's topic is dark INFJ types in popular literature, dark INFJ characters. Now, INFJs, you might know, are a personality type on the Myerr-Briggs Indicator scale, or type indicator, I think. And they're the rarest personality type in the world, which is why it's a real treat when you come across one in literature. Now, good INFJ types, not that I necessarily differentiate like that or think in those terms, but think Galadriel in The Lord of the Rings, Will Graham in Red Dragon and Hannibal, and Atticus Finch in To Kill a Mockingbird. They're generally characterized by highly developed intuition, empathetic abilities. They're very good with motives and patterns and finding out what people really want, and they're able to see the bigger picture, which is uncommon, and they're very wise. And also they're sort of free of ambition for its own sake. This reminds me of a line from Albert Camus. He called it the vulgar ambitions of the common man or something like that. They're free of that. They're free of ambition for its own sake. They don't believe in self-glorification. They would like to help others if they can. So what happens when an INFJ type sort of turns bad or evil, so to speak? I mean, when they get corrupted. One would imagine that their abilities sort of stay in the same view, except that now it becomes rather warped. And one would think that they sort of, they would use their acuteness of the senses, so to speak, to further their own agenda. Except now that it's dastardly deeds and a sort of propensity for madness. And they would also become narcissistic and destructive, like Raskolnikov, who is one of the characters that we're going to be discussing today. Raskolnikov is the protagonist of Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky, and we're going to be discussing him. Now, Rodion Raskolnikov is the character from Crime and Punishment, and it's basically a story about him being a poverty-ridden ex-law student who succeeds in killing a pawnbroker who's like this old, vicious, sniveling woman, and then it's the story of his psychological decline from there. Now, a lesser-known fact is that Dostoevsky himself was an INFJ character. He has this very famous quote, in which he says that any man who is gifted with a deep intelligence and a deep heart, or a great intelligence and a deep heart, something like that, must be akin to great sadness on the earth. So along those lines, it makes sense that he would put forward the proposition that anyone who commits a heinous crime, such as the one that Raskolnikov does, would indeed have to resort to madness in order to manage it. Right? So at the beginning of the novel, we see Raskolnikov sort of out of sorts. He feels betrayed by the city that he's in. He feels betrayed by society because he believes that he possesses a singular genius which would, in an ideal world, result in wealth and reverence, but instead he can't afford to continue his education and he can't pay the bills, and he hasn't had a decent meal in weeks. So he feels betrayed, and then he finds out that his sister is, well, almost short of selling herself to a richer man so that she can provide for the rest of the family, and that just sort of snaps him. And he goes to pawn his last valuable item, to the town's pawnbroker, and then he develops this idea that he must kill her and steal all of her money. However, you see that whatever he does take from her after killing her, he doesn't actually end up using any of it. He discards the jewels and the coins. So that begs the question, of his real motive. What need was he trying to satisfy by killing that woman, and was the motive of poverty just sort of an unnecessary addition? Perhaps this murder would have happened anyway. Now, the concept of being exceptional and thus deserving of certain liberties is something that a lot of INFJ sort of character types are obsessed with. You see a contortion of this kind of idea in history. You see it being used to catastrophic effect by leaders. Now, a lesser-known fact, Hitler was also an INFJ type. So it reminds me of the concept of the Ubermensch by Nietzsche, which sort of pointed towards the evolution of a superman, a man with exceptional intellect and abilities who must then sort of almost rule over or rise above the mediocre common people. Now, in Crime and Punishment, you see Raskolnikov often referred to as Raskol. It's a sort of nickname that his friends seem to call him. And Raskol actually is a name that means schism or dissenter or sort of divide. And I think it's symbolic for what happens to him, for his psychological decline. So you see him sort of exhibit a kind of dual personality. In many instances, his first instinct is to be kind and charitable and to make someone's difficulty easier. But on the other hand, he's able to just shut off entirely from it and be rather violent. But even after he commits the murder, he's never able to justify it. I mean, you see him try to. There's dialogues, very powerful dialogues, in which he's saying, "Oh, I just killed that sniveling old woman and whatever." I mean, he's trying to justify it, but obviously, ultimately, he's not able to. And you see him sort of terrified and in anguish. And there's this line in which he says that I did not kill the old woman. I simply killed whatever was good in me. I think that's the line. Internalizing guilt is also an INFJ trait. That this critic of Dostoevsky said that she found Dostoevsky very short-sighted, because she said that many people are actually able to kill possibly hundreds of people through a direct order or something, and they'll still go to the opera house in the evening and they'll enjoy themselves and they won't feel like they've done anything wrong. But yet Dostoevsky feels that he must sort of create a character who is slowly going mad because he's killed one person who nobody liked anyway. And I felt that a great deal of the context was created by Raskolnikov's imagination, sort of his dreams. He has this one dream, which is repeatedly mentioned, of him being a child, watching a couple of peasants beat a horse till it dies. Obviously, they're trying to get it to move or whatever, and the horse is hungry and tired, and they sort of beat him to move till he dies. But you see that he feels like both the peasants and the horse. He feels hardened by impoverishment and yet also broken by it. And this sort of thing, this ability to psychologically become another person with all the background that goes with it, the motives, the feelings, this is something that INFJs are known for, and that's what it makes them excellent empaths. Now, the second character that we're going to be discussing is the unreliable narrator in Edgar Allan Poe's The Telltale Heart. Now, I have here a volume of the greatest works of Edgar Allan Poe. I'm in love with this. It's a keepsake edition, and so it has a lot of his poems and his letters, and so this is The Telltale Heart, which is a short story, a very famous gothic tale, and it has a narrator who the entire time tries to convince you that he's not mad, although he quite possibly is, and it's the same acuteness of the senses and the intuition that we talk about, except that it's terribly misguided. Now, he feels himself almost propelled to commit the murder of a man who has done him no wrong, a man whose only flaw is that he possesses one eye which resembles that of a vulture, and that sort of creates a kind of, it starts off, I assume, as an irritation, but then it sort of becomes a full-fledged neurosis, and he feels that he must end this man to rid himself of the eye. And even after he kills this man, he hears a thumping sound, the sort of the sound that a heart makes, or the sound of a watch or something. And he's convinced that wherever he's buried the man, I think buried him beneath the floorboards, and he thinks that the sound is emanating from there, and that it's the dead man's heart, hence the telltale heart. I'm going to read you a paragraph from the first page, because I feel it's one of the best. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived it haunted me day and night. Object there was none, passion there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me, he had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was. He had the eye of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold, and so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of that old man, and thus rid myself of the eye forever. And then he says, now this is the point, you fancy me mad. Ah, well, no surprise there. So you see the narrator commits this crime without any understandable motive. He doesn't take the gold, he doesn't hate the old man, there's no concept of revenge, there's nothing. It's just that he thinks that the old man is something of an abomination, an imbalance that he must put right by killing him. And then he's always feeling that the eye is watching him. There's obviously a misguided use of his senses, which can happen in INFJ types if they're suffering from any kind of mental illness. There wasn't really a concept of mental illness in the 18th century. I think they just, all the sort of literature, if you sort of dig it out, you see that they're describing always that it's a heightened sort of sensory state. They never really describe it as an illness. Jane Eyre, another gothic novel, That being a novel, this being a story. You know, you feel that she's always feeling a presence inside the walls. Sometimes she can hear something. She's always got this idea that someone is stalking her and watching her, and someone visits her at night. And although in her case, I was probably spot on, because there was a mad woman living in that house secretly. So you see this narrator carry out exactly what you would expect a dark INFJ character to do. He uses his intuition to create a problem that doesn't exist. Then he meticulously plans it. Then he carries it out, and then he also gets away with it. You know, you see that there's policemen who enter and he completely fools them, because obviously INFJs are masters of manipulation. But then his own guilt, his own value system, his own sense of right and wrong sort of disturbs him to the extent that he hears a dead man's heart and confesses on the spot, rather like in a very unnecessary fashion. So now, the clickbait part of this video, is the Joker an INFJ type? Now, I am going to make probably a whole video on the Joker and what I think his psychology to be. However, in a short form, in a nutshell, I don't think that he's an INFJ character. He actually has been known as an ENTP character, which, you know, they're generally very non-conformist, and they're cheeky, and they like to break the rules, and they don't care what consequences their actions have on anyone else. But they do possess often a genius level intelligence. They can respond to stimulus in the environment very easily. So yeah, that's all for today. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch. I'll see you next time.